Hello, I'm Ivory Abana Black, but you can call me Abana. I sit in front of St. Benedict the Moor Church. This church is very familiar to me because as a child, my family spent much time here. No, we were not members of the parish. We were a homeless family that used to come here to their meal program to eat. Today, I'm a cultural anthropologist, a performer, an author, a civic leader, and a teacher. In a moment, I will tell you my story and how my early homelessness affected my life later. But first, I want to give you a little information about the homeless generally and the homeless subculture. What does it mean to say someone is homeless? There are so many definitions, but most of them come down to one point. The homeless are people who do not have permanent housing. Throughout history, there have always been homeless people. Many people become homeless when they flee violence and warfare in their homelands, like the Hmong did in Laos in the 1970s. Others simply cannot get permanent housing for many reasons, most often because of poverty. People in the United States didn't talk much about homeless until the 1980s. Before that, there were people given the negative labels of hobos or tramps. And the perception of many was that they were eccentric people who became homeless by choice. That all changed in the 1980s, and southeastern Wisconsin is a good example of how this changed. Throughout the 1980s, the urban areas in Wisconsin were losing industry. Many factories closed down as the economy was moving more into services than manufacturing. And many factories also moved into the suburban or rural areas, and some even left the country. Now, this led to the loss of thousands of family supporting jobs in the urban areas. This led to a great jump in homelessness. During those years, there were also policy changes where many of the mentally ill could leave institutions, and many of them also became homeless. How many people are homeless today? The numbers are all over the place, depending on how the homeless are counted. In recent years, studies by the National Alliance to End Homelessness and the Department of Housing and Urban Development have suggested that there are between 750,000 to almost 1 million homeless in the United States. In 2006, the Milwaukee Continuum of Care conducted a street census of homeless people in shelters and other homeless sites and found over 2,400 homeless here. But some say that this is a major undercount. The anthropologists at Urban Anthropology, Inc. have long been involved in homeless issues. Our founder, Dr. Jill Florence Lackey, conducted one of the first studies of homelessness in Milwaukee between the late 1980s and the early 1990s. At that time, many people had just lost their jobs in industry or had just left mental health institutions. She and her colleagues spent years visiting 2 day centers for the homeless and found a subculture developing among the homeless. Because of the changes in circumstances, many people were using homelessness as a subsistence strategy, which meant that they could no longer afford to be in housing all year around. So they periodically had to live on the streets. The homeless found networks they could travel with while they were on the streets. Each day, the homeless would follow a predictable pattern of spending their nights in homeless shelters or places like cars, underneath bridges or park benches, and then moving to a breakfast meal site on Wisconsin Avenue. During the day, they visited day centers or spent time at the public libraries, and then walked to a supper site like St. Benedict's Church. They followed this pattern while walking miles and miles each day, no matter what the weather was like. Back then, most of the homeless were men without children. At the day centers, almost all the men played the card game of spades all day. Here was one place where the homeless could gain some status. The homeless played the game for many hours each day and grew very skilled at it. Some even went to regional championships. Those with the greatest skills got to sit at certain higher prestigious tables, and others with lower skills, like Dr. Jill and her colleagues, were demoted to the losers table. The homeless shared information to help others survive on the streets. They shared information on the warm places and how they could find shelter. They spread the word about free meal sites, free health care, and clothing banks. They talked about how panhandling worked and the kinds of jobs that people could get while homeless. Over time, Jill and her colleagues began to work with the homeless, and together they set up an organization called Repairers of the Breach, which now had new leadership and operates a day center. The homeless began writing their own stories and had their own newspaper and advocated for their own issues. The biggest problem they faced was getting housing or work while they were still homeless. They organized around the issue of general assistance, which was a Milwaukee County welfare program for people without children. In those days, a poor person in permanent housing could get a maximum monthly check of $205, but someone without housing could get only $107. It was impossible to rent any kind of place for that money. Most families with children could get enough money in the AFDC welfare program to pay their rent, and only a few families with children were homeless back then. The mostly male homeless working with Repairers of the Breach and other organizations held marches and met with politicians. They even put on their own theatrical production to tell their stories and drew very large audiences. The play was called There's No Place Like, but it was a very conservative time in politics. The homeless were not successful in getting the general assistance payment raised. In fact, within 2 years, the general assistance program was actually dropped by Milwaukee County, and the homeless rate soared. By the mid-90s, the AFDC program was also dropped for families with children. Wisconsin Works, or W2, replaced the AFDC in 1997 and offered limited-time job and social support programs. Over the 1990s, the number of homeless families doubled. Now, I remember during the late 1980s, my family also became homeless, and we were a part of that subculture. During these times, as a child, being homeless was not fun nor easy. I remember waking up in a shelter somewhere. Me and my mother would stick around long enough to talk to the other parents and children. We would then head over to St. Benedict the Morse Church for lunch. After that, we'll go over to my grandparents' home, talk and socialize with the family, and then we would head off to a dinner program at a church on Titonia, and then head back to the shelter that we were staying. Now, my mother realized that having a child and being homeless was simply not the way to go. So she picked herself back up, went to MATC and received an associate's degree, and now she's working at Freighter Hospital as a tech. And I owe a lot of my life from my mother. She gave me the willpower and the strength to keep going further. Today, the homeless rate in southeastern Wisconsin continues to grow. The introduction of new illegal drugs, such as crack cocaine, in Wisconsin played major roles in increasing homelessness. At the turn of the 21st century, anthropologists at Urban Anthropology, Inc. decided to revisit old homeless studies and to collect stories from the homeless. To date, we have collected nearly 150 stories. These stories provide all kinds of information on homelessness and the subculture, as well as pathways into homelessness. I'm going to turn you back to your cultural anthropologist and let you talk for a while. I wonder what pathways into homelessness you might identify. What do you think are all the reasons people become homeless in this area now? Hello, I'm back. Well, we hope you figured out some of the pathways into homelessness. Now we will hear some of the stories of the homeless themselves. These are some of the stories we collected in our study.
I'm broke, I ain't got no dimes. I'm broke, and I ain't got no dimes. Yes, I'm broke, baby, I ain't got no dimes. Everybody get in hard luck sometimes. My homeless blues, they make me feel forlorn. Some soap might help my old tattered and torn. I got no home, yeah, I got no nest. Park bench by night, it might offer me some rest. Employment forms, they all want my phone and address. How long have I been this homeless man?
Well, I was homeless. My whole goal while I was homeless was to buy heroin and cocaine. I didn't care about eating. I didn't care where I slept. I really didn't care about anything except to do what I needed to do to stay high. What did I do? I wasn't like a panhandler or something like that. I would go around after I would wake up in the morning, and I would go from business to business, little ma and pa type shops, and I'd ask them if they had odd jobs that I could do. I would tell I was homeless, and I'd ask them if they had odd jobs I could do for cash. You know what I mean? I was willing to work, but the only reason I was willing to work was because I needed the money for dope. Okay? A lot of places would give me a meal, and a lot of places would give me jobs. And there was a lot of places that called the police on me, I've had people answer me with, get a job, you bum. And my standard reply was, give me one. One thing that I happen to know about being homeless is once a person gets into that predicament and they don't have the availability to clean themselves up and wear clean, they pretty generally stay in that predicament. It's very hard to get out of it because people want to say they're willing to help you, but they're not really willing to help you do anything besides say they're willing to help you.
I had a job and I made $9 an hour, but a third of what I had went to the child care center, and nearly half went to rent. The rest went to food and regular bills. And I got 5 kids with no other money. You can't make it on that. It's just plain and simple. I got skills though. I went to school and learned to be a cook, and I worked at good restaurants too. I did what I was supposed to do. You just can't have kids and make it on $9 an hour. And when my daughter got pneumonia, I had insurance, but the copay was high and the hospital wanted me to pay out $300 a month. And I couldn't give them but $20 or $30, and they took me to court. Then my boyfriend got married and wanted to get custody of my kids. I had to fight him in court, and I had to pay $200 a month for a lawyer, and he didn't even do nothing. I had to get all the witnesses and do all the legwork. I fell behind a little on my rent, and then I got kicked out. They tell you, you got a skill and you're making $9 an hour. You can pay your bills. Just pay your bills. and anything come up in your flat. I mean, you can't do it. They say here that they're gonna help me, and they do. But I just can't convince them of the obvious. I'm off the streets now, but I'll be back. Ain't no way you can do it. I could do like these other women and sell a little pot, but I ain't raising my kids in that environment. So I do it the way they say, but ain't no way it can work. I mean, you do the math. I'm trying to find a job now that'll pay me just a little more, but so far no good. I mean, the good salad and grill jobs are way out by Waukesha. And then I'd have to find a better car and spend hours traveling, and my daycare wouldn't keep the kids that late. I don't know what the solution is.
I had a good job making $40,000 a year. I worked there for 14 years when they downsized. Soon after that, I was in an auto accident and ended up spending 13 months in a hospital. Being laid up for all those months and being out of work put a strain on my marriage of 13 years and my family. My wife found someone else, and that left me out on the streets. I was homeless. I've been on the streets for 5 months. I've slept in garages, abandoned cars. I've even slept on a kid's slide on the playground. You have to know where to sleep and be safe and avoid getting a ticket for loitering or vagrancy. I'm staying at the Mission now, and that's been a blessing. It could be worse. I look for work during the day. I'm a welder by trade, but most of the jobs I get are only temporary jobs that might last a day or so before they tell you they don't need you anymore. Being homeless is lonely and frustrating. There's very little responsibility on the streets. You're only responsible for yourself, and you learn real quick where to sleep, where to get your next meal. I miss my wife and kids, though. I miss those responsibilities.
Before I was homeless, I was an alcoholic and drinking a lot. The money was coming from disability. The thing is, I had all the food I could eat, and I had my rent paid on a limited budget. I had all the cigarettes I needed and all the food I needed for a month, and I was bored. I used to sit in my room and drink 40 ouncer after 40 ouncer, and that was the first thing I would do in the morning. I lived in such flop houses, just being in a stale room, and my landlords got tired of me. Even though they were flop houses, they wouldn't sometimes let me live there. I went down a long road of drunkenness, and I started to bleed internally, and I tried to get every type of care I could find manageable to get treatment for my alcoholism. But when I got through the program, I would just start drinking all over again.
I've been homeless for the greater part of 20 years. I tried before, I really did. There were no low-skilled jobs that paid anything, so I tried to get training. But these programs go too fast, or they think you already know a lot you don't. Like these folks that train you on the machines or the computers. They gotta go slow enough for people at my level that never did enter this before. I ended up just dropping out. I worked hard when I worked, and I was never late or absent, unless I was really sick. But I didn't have the skills they was looking for, and it all just moved too fast for me. Everything was moving too fast.
I see them when I go to the shelter and they let them go at night and they come after me. People saves them up for when I come, you know. So I don't go no more to that shelter. I go to the lake and then I look for them, you know. It used to be my neighborhood full of cats, but rats too. And the rats is the ones that did the chasing because the landlord had them all filled up.
I took an early retirement and early Social Security. It didn't leave me much to live on. I didn't have any insurance after 63, and then I had to have a bypass. It took all my savings, and I still have to pay for the hospital bill each month. I started drinking heavy after that. I didn't have any kids, and all my brothers had died. With the drinking and the low cash, I lost my house. Now I live like 6 months homeless and 6 months with a room or something. I try to make sure the 6 months homeless are in warmer weather. So I stay in my own little secret place, and I go to the meal site for breakfast. The library here is nice, quiet, it's pretty, it's a spiritual place to be. I feel a kind of inner peace.
I was living at home. I had my son at home, and the father said he wouldn't marry me because why should he buy the cow when the milk was free? My mother called me a whore, and my dad beat me. They said they should keep my son because I wasn't worth him. I was 25 and never been married, and the father deserted me. I wanted to move out, but my parents kept saying that they would take my son away if I did. Then one day I slept late when my son was crying, and they just kicked me out. They locked my son in the room so I couldn't get him with me. I moved in the Hope House and then here. I could get in here because I had a job, but I still can't get my son back. I got a lawyer from them now, and I'm going to sue them and get my son back. If I get my son back, I will move to another state because I think they will kidnap my son. The whole thing is that I didn't get married and I had a baby, so they think I'm a whore and think that because of that they think I'm unworthy to raise my child. I see a lot of girls here who had 2, 3 kids and weren't married, and no one tells them they can't raise their kids.
I was homeless once. I had a bad apartment, and I kept telling the landlord that the toilet didn't flush and the bathroom sink was plugged up. I had to keep the bathroom door closed because it smelled like an outhouse. So I said I wouldn't pay the rent. And he tells me to leave. I refused until they called the sheriff. My brother took me in, but the wife didn't want me to stay, so 3 days later he dropped me off in front of the guest house. But they was full. He never even brought my clothes with me so I couldn't change for work. Yeah, work. I had a job at this fast food place out on Moreland Road. I used to take the coach line bus to get there. The first night I'm homeless, it's pretty warm. It's October. So I find a park bench and I sleep there. So I go to work, but I didn't shave, and the boss asks me why, and I say, I'm homeless. And they tell me to wait until I got my life together and I should come back to work. I get my check from my boss and rent this room. Then my brother brings me clothes and I get cleaned up and the job takes me back. But it took a long time to get my life back in order. But I would never deal with no landlord like that one again. And I ain't spoken to my brother's wife in 2 years. What they done to me shouldn't happen to no brother. My brother said he felt bad, but she never said she was sorry. My employer was good, though. I'm still working for him.
It started out when I started getting homeless. I was in a gang, and a rival gang. It murdered my mother and my little sister. And me and my dad, we went on a revenge type thing. And now my dad's in prison, and he's not supposed to get out. He might stay there for life. Now I got no one. I'm alone. It's all about lack of controlling emotions and about gangs. Some people might think it's easy to be homeless. It's not like just shooting a breeze and drinking a beer, getting high and all. You have to deal with yourself all the time. You can't take a shower every day. You have to look at yourself, look at somebody else. I'm only 18. And I've been homeless going on years now. I'm like in puberty now. I see attractive women and I like them. I can't even bring myself to talk to them. I can't bring myself to ask anybody for a job. It's hard because when you think about yourself, I'm still homeless and I don't know when I'll get my act together. I just hope people realize that homelessness is not very easy.
Trouble in mind, I'm blue, and I won't be blue always, 'cause the sun gonna shine in my back door someday. I'm all alone at midnight, and that street lamp flickering is low. Never had so much trouble in all my life before. Oh, trouble in mind, I'm blue. Trouble on my worried mind. Now when you see me laughing, I'm laughing just to keep from crying.
Well, were you right? Did you figure out the major pathways into homelessness? Now, do you think you can brainstorm over ways to prevent homelessness? This is the real issue, isn't it?